Hello. So today I'm going to be reviewing a book I've reread recently for the purposes of this what do you call it, book review channel or booktube, or just someone messing around. That book is Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, and if you haven't read it, I really think you should have a look, because it's a really wonderful, interesting, strange, beautifully written, imaginative, moving, humorous, fantastic read. It's all of those things. So I will be saying adding it to your list would be a good idea. It's a fantasy book, but that's misleading, because it's not fantasy in the sense of elves and dwarves and goblins and a magical kingdom overrun by the forces of darkness and anything like that. It's fantasy in the sense of maybe literary fantasy, maybe even you might call it a bit of magical realism. So don't go into it expecting goblins and a quest or anything like that. And I actually listened to the audiobook version, which is narrated by Fenella Woolgar, who does a fantastic job of it. And I'll be keeping an eye out for any other books narrated by her, because it was a really fantastic job. Anyway, so what's the book about? The book, as I said, is a fantasy, and it's a fantasy that starts in 1910, I think, and it starts with the main character, Ursula Todd, being born one winter's day and immediately dying. So you can see from the setup there, that's a bit of a strange way to begin a book, but what you then immediately get is a subsequent life where instead of dying she lives, where she takes another breath, takes a first breath, and then gets on with the business of living in early 20th century England in a upper middle class household that's rather well to do. The third of three children. Oh, just go under the barbed wire here. There we go. So then, as the story unfolds, you realise that what's happening is we're seeing all the different lives that Ursula might live, all the different permutations. What happens if she were to turn left instead of right? What would happen if she studied something different when she went to university, or when she did her A-levels? What would happen in a number of different ways, endless different ways really, as her life unfolds. And you know, it could be a little bit twee when you say it like that, but the execution is just incredible. Every line is well written, every character is vivid and comes to life, and the situations are full of humour and pathos, and it's just a really involving, interesting idea executed in a really interesting way. It's something where I can imagine, from the point of view of writing, it's almost like a writing exercise. There's certainly an appeal to being able to rewind the story and explore what happens if the characters turn different directions and explore different paths. The other thing that's really interesting is exploring different aspects of history and the historical situation. So, for instance, the Second World War features very heavily. I'd say at least half the book is set over the period of the Second World War in various different permutations. in some of the permutations, she's in London in the Blitz, helping to control and ameliorate the damage caused by the bombings. And in some of the stories, in some of the versions of her life, she's in Germany and has kind of fallen into various upper echelons in Germany. Every character in the book is all of the main characters, all of her immediate family. Everyone is really well realized. Everyone is, as I said earlier, just feels vivid and real and immediate. From her older sister Pammy, who's more down to earth and maybe less imaginative than Ursula, to Morris, the older brother, who's got a mean streak a mile wide and is in some ways the villain of the piece, again and again in different permutations, to her mum and dad, to her Aunt Izzy, who's gratifyingly mad, and who also, there's a subplot about her crazy aunt writing a series of books which are essentially a pastiche of the Just William books by Richmore Crumpton, but a loving pastiche, I would say. I mean, the author clearly has a lot of affection for those books, but they're very consciously a parody of those books. And the other thing that's interesting about this strange technique, this strange idea, is the way it allows the author to play with time and consequence and kind of repetition. You'll find yourself reading a passage and it will be really familiar, and then you'll realize that you read the same passage in the first quarter of the book, but under slightly different circumstances, and now that you're reading it again, there's all these new implications to what you're reading, all these kind of new nuances, and yeah, that's really wonderful. And the other thing I'd say is, having read it as the audiobook or listened to the audiobook, I'd like to really give a shout out to the narrator, Fenella Woolgar, because she does this amazing job of making all the characters come to life. She somehow manages to give each of the main characters a similar but distinct voice and like inflections and vocal mannerisms, and it feels like a situation where the narrator and the author, it just is she's the perfect narrator for the book. Sometimes you get audiobooks where it feels like there's a tension there between what the narrator's trying to do and what the author has written, and with this one it just really feels like she's adding to it. She's really just bringing something wonderful to the performance, because that's what it is. It's not just a reading, it's a performance, and a really good performance. Are there any downsides to the book? Well, I was never really bored. There were a few times where I was a little bit dislocated, a little bit disorientated by one of the new threads starting, but I mean, never jarringly enough that it really made me want to stop reading. And as I said, this is the second time I've read it. I could imagine reading it again without feeling bored. It really feels rich and layered, like there's a lot of different things to get from it. There are things that I've picked up the second time which I didn't the first time, and so on. I could imagine there being bits a third time as well. So there isn't that much that I would criticize about it. I think it would be a really good use of your time to pick it up and give it a go. The other thing that's interesting is there's a semi-sequel to this, which is called A God in Ruins, which isn't about Ursula, it's about one of the other main characters from this novel, and it's not the same as this. It doesn't do the looping different iterations, but it's also got this slightly offbeat, fantastical strangeness to it, and so you could read them as a piece. Really, they do complement one another. In terms of what I would say it's similar to, as I've said, it's not fantasy in the way that you might imagine fantasy is. It's more fantasy that's a bit literary and is a little bit reminds me of David Mitchell, of Cloud Atlas, not Backstory, although Backstory by that David Mitchell is also excellent. But it's got that that slightly dreamlike, but also very vivid and real, three-dimensional, but also definitely fantastical and whimsical tone that the David Mitchell books like Cloud Atlas and The Bone Clocks have. It has that kind of feeling to it. Of course, there's so much that you can do with this idea. There's so many different things that you could explore, and Kate Atkinson does a lot of those things. She does so many like wonderful tricks, which she's paved the way for doing by having this weird structure and this strange conceit. As a for instance, so there's, without giving too much away like a spoiler, there's one iteration where something really terrible happens to her when she's 16, and you can then see the way that poisons her whole life, the way it poisons everyone around her, the way people act towards her in such an unfair way, and the way she internalizes a sense of guilt and a sense of damage, and that then echoes throughout the whole rest of her life. And then you see other versions where she doesn't let that thing happen to her, where she really takes ownership of the situation and again redefines herself by doing that, and lives a different type of life as a result. So it's got this sense of rich psychological truth to it. Ursula, as she goes through these different lives, has not a memory of the previous lives exactly, but she has little moments of fragmentary recall, or an inkling that she's been in that situation before, and that then guides her in some ways, almost like finding the right way through a maze, finding the right way that she can navigate through life. I don't think it's about navigating it in the right way, like there's only one right way and all the rest are wrong, but there's certainly pitfalls and lots of different permutations. So yeah, in summary, a wonderful book, really worth your time. If you listen to audiobooks at all, I'd definitely consider reading this one as an audiobook, because the narrator is fantastic. And I hope you enjoy it like I did, because it's wonderful, and let me know what you think. And I have to say, contractually, as it were, I write short stories and sometimes novels, and nothing as rich as this, I would be quick to point out. But I have got some short stories which are maybe aspiring to something similar in the tone or the voice or the strangeness, even if it's not as well realized. And so check out my website, www.jamiebrindle.com. I'll put the link to that below and in my profile. And if you go there, you'll be able to find several short stories to read for free, as well as a free book or two to download if that's what you want. And after this video, this will then link to a recording of one of my short stories, which, if you're bored, you can have a listen to. Bye bye.